Good evening, ladies and gentlemen. I have with me Mr. V. Umashankar. He's a very senior IAS officer. He handles a very encouraging and very important project in Haryana called CRID, and he also heads the CMO in Haryana. His job is to monitor most of the developments which are happening in our neighboring state. Sitting in Delhi, you look at two places, Haryana and UP. UP is emerging, and Haryana we are seeing that it is taking strides in various aspects. We are seeing that how this external corridor came up, then how you are taking the industry forward. But sir, I want to start with this ambitious project of yours, CRID. In simple terms, if I can say, Parivar Pehchan Patra. Your Chief Minister is very enthusiastic about it. And at least whenever I meet him, the first conversation is about PPP and how he is transforming these social services and the delivery of services. Help us understand that how this beautiful architecture works.
Thank you very much, and pleasure being here. As you said, Parivar Pehchan Patra, it grew out of the vision that our Chief Minister had, and since 2015 onwards, he had been trying out various mechanisms and processes for putting it in place. The key behind PPP is data. We all say that data is the new oil, and it is true as much for governance also. And amongst all other infrastructure we talk about, digital infra, and more importantly, digital soft infrastructure is very important to ensure good governance as we go ahead. And part of it lies in putting together a database of families in the state. Why do we need to do that? The normal approach of governance is that citizens apply for a particular scheme, and on the basis of the application, the benefit gets processed and the money gets pushed in. We have seen a few advances that have happened over the last decade. Essentially, first Aadhaar coming in as a unique identity of a person, and secondly, the direct benefit transfer mechanism. Now is the time to progress on to the next stage where a citizen does not need to apply for a benefit, and automatically the system itself recognizes as to who is eligible for the benefit and delivers it to him. So it's completely inverting the citizen government interface, where the government goes to the doorstep of the citizen instead of the citizen applying for a benefit. And at the core of that infra is Parivar Pehchan Patra. So PPP essentially builds layers upon Aadhaar. It is probably n times more complicated than Aadhaar in the sense that it retains a lot more socio-economic data, essentially intended for the purpose of giving benefits and services to the people. Now, we have been at it for the last 3 years now. We started in January 2020. The conception of the department happened in the interregnum between the elections. When the 2019 elections were underway, we were tasked with a job to put together a mechanism wherein we could take this PPP forward, because there had been 2 failed attempts prior to it, and we couldn't carry it forward. So it was decided to set up a new department called the Citizen Resources Information Department, CRID for short. And we started in January 2020. We found that the data that we could put together helped us during COVID, because COVID was a period during the lockdown. Reaching out to the citizens became a problem, to the people became a problem. You had to provide certain benefits to the people in those times of distress. How do you identify them if the citizen or the family cannot move out of their household? And that's where the benefit of what we were doing started getting felt. Once it started getting felt, then there was an exponential growth that happened. Incidentally, every data that is retained in PPP is also verified. For example, now nobody needs in Haryana to apply for a ration card. The system recognizes every month, passes on information to the citizen on the basis of a mobile message and tells him about his eligibility. He can just go to the nearest ration shop the next month and start receiving his benefits. Similarly, if you take old age pension, what is at the national level called the NSAP, the National Social Assistance Program, the system itself identifies the eligible person who's attaining the age of 60. And we just go to him, now seek his consent. No forms are filled. The consent of the citizen for receiving the benefit under the scheme is sought, and the benefit starts immediately thereafter. So in effect, we were trying to invert the government-citizen relationship by taking government to the people rather than the citizen applying for a benefit of the service from the government. That's in short the large picture of the ambitious program that we have called the PPP.
So, first thing which comes to mind is that how are you verifying the data which you are collecting? Second is that authenticity of the data, because there are multiple parameters which requires somebody to voluntarily provide the data. So help us in understanding that how are you validating these two elements?
We essentially use three elements for verification. Now, we can classify the data that we are keeping in PPP as certain data that requires a one-time verification. Say, date of birth. A date of birth is unlikely to change. Once it is verified and it has been validated, put on, then you don't need to revisit it again. By now, we have validated 96% of the population's date of birth. Caste, for example. The caste category continues. It's derived from the father. So once that is validated, it remains. And it is the choice of the citizen to use the benefit of that caste category or not. These are invariants. Gender, of course, one can change, but it's unlikely to change during a lifetime, maybe change once. Name, for example. Unlikely to change often, but yes, there could be one or two changes that can happen during a lifetime. These verifications once done, then you only need to capture the change. There are some which will change frequently, say the income status or the engagement status of the particular the members of the family, or even the composition of the family. This tend to change far more often. So for the composition of the family, there are essentially four mechanisms by which the composition changes: birth, death, marriage, and migration. We have linked the data to the birth data of the CRS, the Civil Registration System. We have linked it to the death registration as well as to all the burial grounds and the cremation grounds in the state.
These all parameters you already had, right?
Automatically gets linked. So they were existing as standalone data.
There is another element which you don't have, that is income. And income tax is largely a center subject. So how do you bring that element?
Right. So income is probably the most complicated of the various data sets to verify. So we use multiple levels of verification. We have a service that has been notified by the CBDT, which allows us to tap into the income tax database for a yes-no verification of threshold incomes. So we have, for all the people who have or on the PPP database, 2.8 crore people of the state, we have run it through the income tax database on the income thresholds of the below poverty line and one step above the below poverty line, which is 1.8 lakhs and 3 lakhs. And we get a yes-no return from there. So we have a validation on the basis of the income tax returns that you file, and we take an average of the last 3 years income tax that you file. Two, we have, income is essentially the process by which an income estimation gets done runs on three basic pillars. The first is income. People will generally not be too truthful about their income. But there are still certain databases from which you can capture income data. So a government servant, for example, a person who's a contractual employee in government. Now there is a cess that every I mean, every employer in the organized sector pays for every employee in that sector for benefits that flow to the employee. So that is there, the wage that is paid out to the employee is also reported. So we tapped into those databases also. So one is where you are able to get an authentic information about the database. The second is on expenditures. Now, even when the NSSO does its surveys, on income surveys, it actually uses expenditure as the dipstick. The element that they use is what is called the mean per capita expenditure, MPCE, to estimate the incomes. We did a similar activity there. So we linked up with the electricity consumption database, which is a fairly accurate database. So from the electricity consumption, we can make a certain estimation about the income status of that family. The third element, and we are using only government database, we don't depend to any private databases. The third is the asset. In the past also, asset ownership, land holdings, property holdings have been taken into account. We have also linked up with the Vahan database for vehicle ownership. So from there we also get vehicle ownership data in, which validates and provides information about the kind of vehicle ownership that is there in the family, and we make an estimation about the income status of the family. We also are looking at a fourth element, which is vulnerability. I mean, poverty is not just income. Poverty is multidimensional. A family whose child attends an Anganwadi is likely to be poorer than a family whose child goes to a nursery school. So we have linked up with all the school databases and the Anganwadi databases to get a picture on the family vulnerability characteristic. IIT Kanpur has developed an AI model which, on the basis of BMI reporting, can give you a range, an income range of that particular family or that particular member. So it's very novel, and it's still at the testing stage. So we have been collaborating with IIT Kanpur on that to perfect our models as we go along. See, most of the government schemes have income thresholds as a basis for eligibility, a below poverty line, a social assistance program, an agriculture subsidy. So for us, that threshold is important. You are above the threshold, it doesn't matter to us. But if you are below the threshold, that is very important for the state to ensure that nobody gets left behind. So we use this through multiple triangulation items, and we then built a picture of the family. We also have something called a local committee system. This is an inbuilt social audit system also insofar as income assessment or validation is concerned. And usually people who are at the margins, they are the ones you will not find them in any database. At least any income database or an expenditure database or an asset database. So in these cases, what we do is the local committee, which consists of 5 members, we are now bringing it down to 3. A government servant, a local operator, and usually a CSC operator, but not always, a social activist, a volunteer, and a student, who go visit the household and make their own assessment independently. And we have developed an AI-based system that runs an algorithm and arrives at a possibility of a range. Where we cannot determine it, then it is pushed on to the next stage. But our model is now able to predict up to about 90% of the validations of the certifications that come. There are errors there. I mean, without doubt, there are errors. And what we need to do in such a case is to provide a grievance handling mechanism where the citizen can come and report that he is not satisfied with what's been done, and he gets an opportunity. He gets an opportunity to put forward his case, and that gets heard at a certain level. Yeah. So, in short, the income estimation, we have developed our own mechanisms and processes, still in the works, but As it stands, yes, we have been able to make significant progress as we go along.
Maybe if I can take you a little bit further, there is a similar exercise being done for Aadhaar, but I'm told that Haryana was not allowed to get the access of Aadhaar because of the data privacy norms which we have. Do you think that Haryana had to do the double up exercise? There has to be some state center data sharing mechanism so that many of these efforts, states are devoid of attempting, especially when the financial constraints are there with the states. So what is your view like?
So we have not doubled up on Aadhaar. Yes, when the first attempt that was made in 2015, as I mentioned earlier, at that time the hearing in the Aadhaar case was going on, and there were certain sensibilities about how Aadhaar could be used for this kind of an exercise. So the whole thing was halted at that point in time. But even in Aadhaar, a whole lot of modifications have been done over time, and we are very thankful to the Government of India and especially to the Prime Minister's office who have helped in streamlining or at least putting together a set of regulations that enable sharing of data between the state and the center. Now, PPP's base is still Aadhaar. It is not different from the Aadhaar. So we don't keep identity information. Any identity information is drawn from the Aadhaar database. So we do not duplicate that kind of data. So if it's fingerprint, biometric, or an iris, or a name with the Aadhaar as a unique ID, it is exactly as it's there in the Aadhaar database. We do not allow any modification on that basis. So if a person needs to change his name, for example, he'll have to first get it changed in the Aadhaar database, and then automatically the PPP database will then get updated. But Aadhaar also stores certain information like date of birth. It does not verify that information. It is on a self-declared basis. So people have been changing those dates based upon, there have been a certain amount of gaming that has happened there. We verify the documents for birth, and there is a layer of what we call the gold standard and the silver standard and the bronze standard for acceptance of these documents. And we verify the data. So our data on date of birth is more accurate than the Aadhaar database. It doesn't store some of the other data points, such as, in fact, even gender data in Aadhaar was to an extent incorrect because they do not verify it. It's left to the registering entity at the time of registration to ensure that the data has been entered in correctly. And there are no subsequent validations. So to that extent, for these data points which are both in Aadhaar and Parivar Pehchan, PPP, what is called the Family Information Depository, and is not verified in Aadhaar, we do a verification exercise. And there is this third element where the data sets are not there in the Aadhaar database itself. There, of course, we build it and put it.
So, Umashankar, similar exercise was attempted by previous Siddharamaiah government in Karnataka, even Jayalalitha's government in Tamil Nadu, but they couldn't succeed. You must have studied, where they went wrong and how, Haryana did better to build up this infrastructure.
So essentially, yes, Madhya Pradesh, Karnataka, Tamil Nadu, they have attempted an exercise of this kind, specifically from a beneficiary viewpoint. But they all started with using the NFSA database as the base data. Now that works on the presumption that the NFSA database is correct. It has been built up over a period of 20-30 years. We have no idea as to whether that is correct. Family structures have changed. So if a person, for example, unfortunately dies, there is no incentive for the family to correct that data because you get an extra 5 kg for that member. In fact, the basic change that we made was that we did not go with any existing database. We started afresh. So everything was taken in afresh and verified, and then the existing databases were changed. So when we reached, it took us about 2 years to reach there. But then we sort of checked with the NFSA database. We found that there was a one-to-one correspondence in only 27% of the families.
Okay.
Only 27%. So that was the extent of change that we needed to make. Now the NFSA database was totally withdrawn and was completely replaced with the PPP database.
So, sir, now when you have database and you have understanding of incomes and all, and when suddenly when we see CMI's data that Haryana has this much of unemployment rate, so now what is your understanding? What is the exact unemployment rate in your state?
See, I mean, it's about 6%. 6.2% or something based upon the PPP data. See, it depends on the question that you ask, because in CMI, I mean, they report as a data set. The question, if you notice what on their website, the question that is asked from their sample, which obviously is a statistical sample, is it's not whether you are employed or not. It says, are you actively looking for work? Now, what we found is that, I mean, the aspirations, especially in these areas, are high. You might be engaged in something, and there is a rush for, say, a government job in the north. So when you ask a person a question as to are you actively looking for work, it doesn't mean that he's unemployed right now. It just means that he's looking for a better job. So if you look at the question that they are asking in their survey, that gives you a sense. So at one point of time, I think CMI reported unemployment figure of 27%.
7%.
It doesn't just seem logical. I mean, Haryana has been
More
doing...
than 1/4 of Haryana is looking for a job.
So, I mean, it just doesn't stand to reason. There is something with that problem with that data. And the key is not how they go about, the key is the question that they ask. It's the typical yes minister story as to the questions determine the results of the survey. And that's where I think the secret lies here.
Okay. And sir, now to this infrastructure is implemented. So I want to understand how much saving the state makes into their social expenditures.
See, the approach is not on savings. So although there have been savings, there have been ration cards that have been cut, and there have been people who have been detected who are taking these pensions wrongly. There have been a whole set of these cases. But the approach is not that we need to make a saving. The approach is, can we reach that person who's otherwise troubled? So, I mean, the key point here is that if people have to apply, then we have left them at the mercy of the people in the lowest ladder of the government hierarchy. And not everybody will be able to wind their way through the government maze to get what they want. This makes it independent of that exercise. So there have been a lot more additions than there have been deletions. The issue is not the saving. The issue is, are we able to reach the person who needs it without him or her having to run around, spend money, visit offices, fill forms to get what they need? So, I mean, when this question has been asked, my answer is that I would not rather mention a figure. I would rather say that this program enables the unreached to be reached. And that is the goal, that is the objective.
Sir, I have spoken to many of the ministers at various states. Many of them admitted that they are studying, this infrastructure of yours and want to implement into their state. And it is our privilege that we have heard it from the architect himself. And thank you very much for your insightful conversation. So, ladies and gentlemen, with a great round of applause, thanks, Mr. Umashankar.